Okay, guys, welcome to a new system. We are doing the endocrine system, and that's located in your book on pages 487 through 517. I would really encourage you to read chapter 13 if you do have your book with you. So maybe I'll just pause a second. I want you to answer this question. Do you know what the endocrine system does already? If you answered it's about hormones, then you would be correct. So you might have heard the words endocrine and exocrine before. What does the word endocrine mean? It means internal secretion. So exocrine would be external, outside of the body secretion, like your saliva, like your sweat glands, okay? But endocrine glands secrete internally, the internal environment of our body. So all the endocrine glands, their job is to secrete hormones into the blood. Then these hormones are going to make their way in the blood to different target cells. We have special receptors that are on these target cells that are very specific to each hormone. All right, so it's going to bind to the receptor of the target cell, and then it's going to have its specific response. So the whole point of the endocrine system, the whole point of all these hormones is regulation. What do they regulate? They regulate metabolism. They regulate sexual development. They can control certain reactions, the rates of them, whether they even start to begin with. They can transport substances through membranes. They help us maintain our water balance, our electrolyte balance, and our blood pressure. What are some of the endocrine glands? And we'll go more in depth as the slides go on. You might have heard of some of these before. We've got our pituitary gland, our thyroid gland, parathyroid glands, the adrenal glands, the pancreas, and of course for the female, ovary, for the male, testes, the kidney, the hypothalamus, the pineal gland. I think I've got one more down there. And the thymus. So just a couple of pictures of these glands on here. You might recognize this because we just got done with urinary, but the adrenal gland is right on top of the kidneys. You might remember back to when we talked about digestive system. We had the pancreas sitting right underneath the stomach. Up here, when we talked about the respiratory system, we have our trachea and our larynx, and going right across the front is the thyroid gland. And of course, up here, you can see the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus are in your brains. The hypothalamus is an area. The pituitary gland is made of two different lobes, anterior and posterior. So what are hormones? If you want to take a look at some specific names and abbreviations, you can find that on page 491 in your book. Table 3.2 is going to give you a list of the source of the hormone, the name of the hormone, and the abbreviation for the hormone. Okay. We can divide all of the hormones into two categories. They're either a steroid hormone or a non-steroid hormone. Okay, steroid hormones are very poorly soluble in water. Okay, so that means they can't dissolve in water. How are they carried then? They're carried in the bloodstream through binding to plasma proteins, and they will ride that plasma protein till it gets to its target cell. Okay, what are some examples of steroid hormones? We have our sex hormones, secretions from the adrenal cortex, and even vitamin D actually becomes a hormone once it's converted to its active form. Some examples of our non-steroid hormones are going to be like your amines, your peptides, your proteins, and our prostaglandins. All right, so the amines are derived from the amino acid tyrosine. That includes something you've probably heard of before, epinephrine, or its opposite, norepinephrine. These are synthesized in the adrenal medulla, and we'll talk about what is the difference between the adrenal cortex and what is the adrenal medulla in a few slides from now. Protein hormones are secretions from the parathyroid gland and the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Peptides are secretions from the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland and also the hypothalamus. And prostaglandins are produced by the cells from the liver, the brain, the thymus, the heart, the kidneys. They all fall in that category. So how are hormones controlled? It is really a negative feedback system. Okay, so I want you to think about a real life example of a negative feedback system would be like the thermostat in your house. Okay, if you have it set at 71, I'm just looking at mine right now, mine's at 71. If the temperature goes below 71, what is going to kick in? My heat. Okay, so the heat turns on, it eventually raises it back to 71, which we could call homeostasis, as that is the normal temperature. But it doesn't just stay going forever. We don't have the heat on forever and ever and ever. After it reaches 71, that heat is going to slow down, it's going to back off or turn off completely. Okay, so let's look at the opposite. If I'm at 71 for my set temperature, the temperature raises above 71, what is going to kick on? My air conditioner. Okay, so the AC turns on, starts bringing that temperature down, 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 down. Once I reach homeostasis or my normal set temperature, it's going to slowly back off or turn off completely. And that's exactly how hormones are controlled, by negative feedback mechanisms. What are those feedback mechanisms? The hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary gland's release of hormones. The pituitary gland is kind of like the master gland because it controls all of the other glands. Okay? The nervous system and the endocrine system work closely together. All right, the nervous system can directly stimulate some glands. Other glands respond all on their own, just directly to changes within their own internal environment. If you'd like to see examples of these three control mechanisms, you can look at figure 13.8. It's located on page 497 in your book. Okay. So let's break down these glands and talk about what do they do. So as I said earlier, the pituitary gland is the master gland. It's located at the base of the brain and is attached to the hypothalamus by a little stalk. Right here is the pituitary stalk. So here's my hypothalamus, pituitary stalk, pituitary gland. Remember, we have an anterior lobe and we have a posterior lobe, and they each secrete different kinds of hormones. So let's talk about the anterior pituitary hormones first. We have the growth hormone, or GH. This is a protein that stimulates cells to enlarge and divide. It can elongate bone tissue, determine fat distribution, and it increases the rate of protein synthesis. Prolactin, or PRL, is a protein that stimulates milk production in females after childbirth, and it affects the sex hormone levels in the ovaries. Males also have prolactin. It doesn't do anything for milk production. All it does is regulate the sex hormone levels in the testes. The adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, stimulates the production of cortisol. Remember, cortisol is the stress hormone, but it's vital to survival. Okay? If you have too much cortisol in your system, you're going to see things like weight gain, and it's too bad because it really is a good thing. It's vital to our survival. It helps us maintain our blood pressure and our blood glucose levels. Next anterior pituitary hormone is the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. It's going to make the thyroid gland make hormones. So it's in charge of regulating metabolism, your energy, your growth and development, and any nervous system activity. Two more anterior pituitary hormones. We have the luteinizing hormone, or LH. It's going to regulate testosterone in men or estrogen in women. We call these hormones gonadotropins because they're regulating the hormones of the gonads. Next, we have the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. It promotes sperm production in males and stimulates ovulation in females. So you can see that our last system, our reproductive system that we just went over, works hand in hand with the endocrine system as well. Now we're going to talk about the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. What are some hormones that it produces? The two main ones that you need to know about are oxytocin and the antidiuretic hormone. What does oxytocin do? It causes milk to let down when you're nursing, and it causes contractions to help move childbirth along during labor. The antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, is a vasopressin, so it's compressing veins, compressing vessels, and it's stored at the back of the pituitary gland, which regulates our water balance. I'm not going to show you this video like on this recording, but I want you to watch this video, so I embedded the link in here. So please go back to this slide and watch this when you're done. Now let's take a look at the thyroid gland. Here's a picture out of your book. All right, so you should recognize the larynx or voice box. You should recognize the trachea. So this tells you where the thyroid is situated. Both lateral lobes of the thyroid are connected by the isthmus. The thyroid is specialized to remove iodine from the blood, and it also controls your metabolism. Here's a TED Talk about the thyroid gland. And again, if you would on your own time come back to this slide and watch it, it does a really good job of explaining more in detail the thyroid gland. Parathyroid. So now we're looking at the posterior side. So here's our trachea. Here's our esophagus. Remember, the esophagus is posterior to the trachea. We have these little itty bitty parathyroid glands embedded within the thyroid gland, located at the posterior side and surface of the thyroid gland. There's 4 of them. They secrete a hormone that regulates the concentration of calcium and phosphate ions in the blood. They can do that because our bones store calcium. So they're going to cause the bones to take up more calcium or release calcium, whatever we need. Also, the hormones from the parathyroid are going to stimulate actions from the kidneys and your intestines. The adrenal glands sit on top of each kidney. So here's our kidneys. Here's our adrenal gland right there on top. It's kind of embedded in the massive tissue that encloses the kidney. They're shaped like pyramids, and they have 2 parts. The inner central portion, just like inside our kidney, we have the medulla and we have the cortex. It's the same thing with the adrenal glands. So the inner central portion of the adrenal gland is called the medulla, and the outer part is the adrenal cortex. So what does the medulla do? It secretes epinephrine, which is just another name for adrenaline, and norepinephrine, it's opposite. So what they do is they can increase your heart rate, your breathing rate, they can elevate blood pressure, and this comes into play when you have your fight or flight survival responses, okay? And I have an assignment about the fight or flight response that is due next week, all right? You're gonna meet, I think his name is Bob, and Bob gets chased by a dog. So you're going to see what happens inside and outside the body during that response. So what does the outer part do? The adrenal cortex is going to secrete aldosterone, which helps the kidneys conserve potassium and maintain blood pressure, also conserve sodium. It's going to secrete cortisol, which keeps our blood glucose or sugar levels stable, and it's our response to any stresses. And then The adrenal cortex also secretes small amounts of sex hormones, not as much as the actual reproductive organs themselves. Here's the pancreas. It's kind of a yellow, feathery type organ, which is located under the stomach. All right, and there's a little duct. You can see these branches here, a duct that passes into the duodenum. So all of the secretions of the pancreas are going to go into the small intestine right here. So what does it do? It helps maintain healthy blood sugar levels. I talked to you about the duct that attaches the pancreas to the duodenum. It's going to secrete its digestive juices there. The pancreas itself contains islands of cells called the islets of Langerhans. This secretes glucagon, which stimulates the liver to break down glycogen into glucose and breaks fats into fatty acids and glycerol. Insulin is glucagon's opposite. All right, so insulin is going to stimulate the liver to form glycogen from glucose and inhibit converting non-carbs into glucose. You'll also be doing a simulation about glucagon and insulin next week. I think that one is Endocrine Ed. So I hope you enjoy that. I hope it helps you learn the action of those hormones. The pineal gland, you can see here, is a small oval structure deep between the cerebral hemispheres. It attaches to the upper portion of the thalamus. The pineal gland secretes melatonin, and you might have heard of melatonin before. It helps us maintain our sleep and wake cycles. We call those circadian rhythms. So when it's light out, we're not producing as much melatonin so that we can be awake, so that we can be just present and able to concentrate. When it starts getting dark, the pineal gland is going to release more melatonin to start getting us sleepy and to help us sleep all the way through the night. Where is the thymus? It's located in the mediastinum, right behind the sternum, but it's between the lungs. So here's the left lung, it's the right lung, it's right up here, okay? It secretes thymosins, which affect the production of white blood cells. So the thymus is what plays a really important role in our immune response. It's very large in children, and it gradually shrinks over time as we get older. Also part of the endocrine system is our reproductive organs from the system that we just talked about. So of course, testes producing testosterone. You already know the functions of the sex hormones because we studied those last time. And the ovaries are going to produce estrogens and progesterone. I'm not going to show the videos here right now, but when you're done reading, you're done going through the notes, I would like you to come back and watch the crash course videos on the endocrine system. All right, that's all I have for you for right now. We will talk soon.